Recording in progress. Another episode of the Square and Compass podcast coming to you from my kitchen. I'm not at the Masonic Temple today. I'm doing this from my home. This is where the best lighting is. And we are here with, and I should have checked this before I hit the record button. Sorry, worshipful brother or brothers? Worshipful brother, right?
Brother.
Sorry. Brother Matthew. We got in touch through, I guess it was one of those games of telephone tag almost. Jason got in touch with Charles, got in touch with you about Mason Hall. Tell us which lodge you're from, and also the work that you're doing in trying to preserve and promote kind of the built legacy and built architecture of Freemasonry.
Brother Matthew Maggy, senior deacon of Richmond Randolph Lodge, number 19. I was secretary for 4 years, but don't hold that against me. So we have been meeting in Mason's Hall since October 29th, 1787. And we've been meeting there every year except for a brief period during the War of 1812 when we were a hospital, when the building was a hospital. Other than that, every week we're there. Our stated communications are on Saturday, the second Saturdays of every month. So we're always there bright and early. We're downtown, so Saturday mornings are a lot better to find parking. The building itself was actually built in 1785 by Richmond Lodge number 13. They're still around today as Richmond Lodge number 10. They moved out west during the 80s, 90s. I mean, they've moved progressively west to several different Masonic buildings, kind of following where the Grand Lodge of Virginia has gone until they ended up at their current home outside of the city limits in Henrico. So we are, to my knowledge, the only city lodge, and we are smack dab in the middle of a place called Shockoe Bottom, which is right next to the James River, downtown, near where all the magic happens. And so our building is the third oldest wood-framed building in Richmond that's still standing in Richmond, to my knowledge. And it is the oldest building built for and used for Masonic purposes in the United States or the Western Hemisphere. It was built as a Masonic lodge and has been a Masonic lodge building ever since. It's gone through a lot of changes over the years. For example, tell me if I'm going on too much. In 1871, they actually expanded the windows and added a pediment and columns to the front porch, which radically changed the facade, as well as adding gas and other amenities to it that it didn't previously have. So it's been painted a few times, most importantly recently, over the years. And the current efforts to preserve it have been sort of ongoing for the past, as long as the building's been around, but really got going in earnest in 2010, 2011. The lodge itself was kind of one of those lodges that was shuffling the same few guys around the chairs. I mean, it was the city. People didn't want to come in from the counties in the city because Richmond was in the 90s the murder capital of the United States per capita. So the lodge kind of went the way of the city with the urban decay, and there was a lot of urban renewal. Urban renewal is the wrong word. There was a lot of renewal and restoration and revitalization of the city of Richmond. And so with that, you got a lot of younger people moving into the city of Richmond, being interested in the lodge. So they joined, our lodge, partially attracted by the building, and with the uptick in membership, gets an uptick in energy towards preserving the building. So there's a 501c3 nonprofit, Mason's Hall 1785, that was established in 1997. And in 2011, 2012, a group of brothers really sort of got into it, and we're looking to make it a major fundraising apparatus. And so with that, Since that time, we've done major structural repair. There was a roof leak for a long time. We replaced the roof. It turns out one of these timbers had been basically rotted through. And so we received funding from the Matthew and Genevieve Mezzanotte Foundation. Matthew Mezzanotte was a 33rd degree Mason in Northern Virginia, and gave a bunch of funds to the house at the temple there, and contributed to that. Well, his niece contributed to do that repair. They also paid to paint the front of the building. Building hadn't been painted in 40 years, and so that's just got the finished paint was a year ago. The roof was replaced 2013, as I mentioned. That was paid for with fundraising from a program by the lodge. We also have been replacing the windows steadily. We have a window adoption program. And recently we received a grant from the Daughters of the American Revolution Commonwealth chapter, as well as a plaque dedicating a historic plaque explaining what the building is to passersby. And so, as we are a part of the fabric of Richmond, we are a wood-sided, framed historic building in a historic city. We've sort of, I guess, revitalized along with the city itself.
Before we go on, I'm curious because windows is something I've actually been thinking a lot about and studying a lot about in relation to the Windsor Masonic Temple. You mentioned that you're replacing the windows at Mason's Hall. Are they being replaced for aesthetic purposes or for energy efficiency purposes? And are you seeing any benefit in terms of your energy consumption with the window replacement?
Well, we are not replacing them. If I said replacing, I misspoke. It's repairing.
Okay.
So these are the old historic wood windows that where some of them have been inoperable. Some of them had broken window panes. The sash weights and sash pools have, the wood's frayed over the years from being exposed to the exterior. So we're starting with the ones that are in the worst condition, and we've got a Dixon Kerr, an old house authority who does windows, who's been doing them, and he pulls them, scrapes them, reglazes them. It's where you place the glass in. And so we keep them historic, and we're in a city historic district. So anything we do on the facade has to keep with the visual representation of the building within the period of significance. So we couldn't put vinyl windows with insulated glass in there. Not that we would want to either, just because it wouldn't really look right on a building from the 18th century.
Why do you think, because this is something I've really tried to emphasize with the podcast, with a lot of work I've done on the Windsor Masonic Temple, our For the Next 100 Years project, which I'll leave some links to. Why do you think it's important for Masonic lodges to put in effort and work to preserve their Masonic buildings and to maintain them for both the lodges themselves and the members of the community? Why is it important that lodges put in that work?
Well, for us, I guess, I can't speak for other lodges necessarily. For us, part of it is being the oldest continuously used and occupied Masonic building, in the United States or Western Hemisphere, is we sort of feel that we're stewards of the lodge for the Masonic community at large. I mean, we get brothers who visit from all over the country who, they come, either they're in Richmond or they're on their way to, that George Washington Masonic Memorial in DC, and they come and they just, they marvel at how, incredible the building is. It's hard to explain when you walk into a historic building like that. It feels different. It feels different when you're sitting in lodge. Because I'm actually an affiliate member. I affiliated in 2016 from from Reno, Nevada, Mount Rose Lodge 40. And, that was kind of a newer building, newer lodge. And, it just feels different being in the same place as, Masons have been doing the same exact thing for, 235 years. And I guess for any building of any historic value, or, it depends on what you consider historic. It's important because so many people have come before that, done the same thing, put in the work on the building. In 1871, you had some Masons figuring out how to make the building more grand. The building was probably re-sided in 1901. And part of it is honoring the work that they've done before. I haven't really got into the history of the building itself and how it was built. I could do that. This fits in better at a better place. But so there's that. I guess what you would call duty to the craft to do that. And for us also, we have a really, really cool building, in the city of Richmond. So it's been a great way for members, the new members, to come in. We have open houses 4 or 5 times a year. So it's nice because it's not just, people interested in Masonry, it's people also interested in the building. And the question always comes up, when I'm giving tours of the building, so what is Masonry? Oh, I've heard of Masonry. And so for us, part of having a really neat building has also helped added to the revitalization of the lodge, because people want to be members of the lodge that meets in the historic building in Mason's Hall. So that for those reasons, it's important to preserve, especially older Masonic buildings. You kind of get some of these later buildings, not to disparage anyone's buildings, that are sort of like the cookie cutter, sort of cinder block type buildings, which are important and historic. But as you start to pull away from as many Masonic buildings that were built around the same time, because a lot of these buildings were built in the 50s and 60s, each one of them becomes their own unique building. Where, for example, the Windsor Masonic Temple was built in 1922, dedicated in 1925, if I'm not mistaken.
Built in 1921, opened in 1922.
Yeah, and so, how many grand buildings from the 1920s exist in the Windsor metro area? Just that one, I assume, right? But and if you go to most areas, you'll have a lodge that was built in the 60s within spitting distance of the city center and some of the surrounding counties. So they're not as unique. So it's important for preserving unique Masonic structures as well.
Before we go on to the building, I'm curious, because this is something else I've been trying to emphasize within my own lodge and through the podcast. Because Mason's Hall is the oldest, continually used Masonic building, because it's got such a history, I'm assuming there's a lot of historical documents, historical records contained within that building. Any efforts to preserve those records and documents? Are there digitization, or how do you go about keeping them safe? Because obviously with, paper that's a couple hundred years old, you're looking at possible wear and tear and all sorts of potential damage to those records.
So most of our records from our lodge, our minutes, are actually at the Grand Lodge building, which is over maybe 5 miles away on 9 Mile Road. The brethren in 1991 or so thought that was a better place to store them. So I've gone through, actually, and I went just even without a digitization machine, because we were trying to do some historic research for a gentleman who was doing research on a member of our lodge, Cloteworthy Stevenson, from 1787, who said to have been associated with the Virginia State Capitol, the U.S. Capitol, and also did woodwork in the Masonic Lodge and Mason's Hall. So I went to the Grand Lodge of Virginia and got the minutes book from 1787 to 1810. I just snapped a bunch of pictures with my cell phone of the pages and put them into, PDF form. And the sort of grand view that I have, and this is what we were talking, I guess, in the green room, so to speak, about full time Masonic career. I mean, if I could have the time, or we could get some retired person. We have a younger lodge. I have two young kids. A lot of members of our lodge have two young kids with careers. We don't have a ton of retired people to just go to the Grand Lodge and digitize. Every single minute book would be, that would be very, very incredible. So I've looked through a few of them, but there's so much more research I want to do. During the American Civil War, Richmond was, the capital of the Confederacy. And, you had the lodge lore has it that, Union officers who were held prison at Libby Prison a couple blocks down were allowed to come to meetings while the war was going on. And, people say that. I haven't seen it written anywhere, but no one's really gone through the minutes book to look. I feel like that's something, if you could see the role of who was at the meeting, you could definitely dive a lot deeper into the, not oral history, but more of the narrative history of the building and things that happened there. So that's my long-term goal. And there's also the minute books from Richmond Lodge number 10. They're Richmond Lodge 10 now. They were Richmond Lodge number 13. At some point, they changed numbers. And Richmond Lodge 13 has theirs all at their building, which is just outside of the city in Henrico. So those are also, my mission. One of my missions and goals is to be able to have the time to go and digitize them.
So, what would you say is the percentage-wise, when you're doing tours of the building, how often do you have, members of just the general public versus Masons? Do you have like Masonic groups taking tours of the building? What is the percentage-wise in terms of interest between general public and Masons?
So typically we do 4 or 5 open houses per year, and those we just put in, the newspaper's website, all the sort of events list, Facebook events and that sort of stuff. And on that, we definitely get a lot more of the. Sorry about that. We get a lot more of the general public than we do Masons, just because Masons visit during lodge meetings, so we get a lot of visiting Masons during lodge meetings, during degree work. We do practices every Wednesday. So sometimes if a Mason's visiting, they'll come in, we'll meet with them a little before and give them a tour of the building. So for Masons, it's more of we meet them there and we give them tours, or they give us a call and say, hey, we're going to be in town. We want to do a tour. In the open houses, we get much more of the general public. Richmond has a lot of history buffs, historic building enthusiasts, preservation groups, museums. For example, we did a private tour for a group from the Valentine Museum, which is a local museum about Richmond history. We have groups from the Historic Richmond Foundation, which is a preservation organization that will meet there and we'll give tours to. We'll have people who are doing Southern architectural woodworking tours, and they'll go on that. So at an open house, I'd say it's 90-10. We usually get about 85 to 90 people over a 4-hour period. So I'd say it's about 90-10 Masons to the general public. Our private tours are probably more 70-30 Masons and general public. We get people from all over. I'm giving tours of people from Scotland. One of the nice things is I used to have a business doing tour guiding in the city. So if someone's in for time and they've got 3 hours, I give them a tour of the building and I give them a tour of the city and point out some other Masonic monuments and otherwise.
What is your relationship like? Because this is something I don't think Masons think about enough. In your case, it's kind of a unique circumstance because you're a historical building. And we talked a little bit about designations and historical designations. But what's the relationship like with the, with the city, with the municipality, with the different heritage groups? A lot of Masons, I think, don't realize, they might be meeting to them, they might just be meeting at their temple, or their building, but that building may have a heritage designation. It may have a relationship with the city. Like, what's it like from your perspective, working with the city when you have a historical property, a historical designated building to maintain?
As previously mentioned, we're in a historic district. We're actually our own historic district. So the Commission of Architectural Review, any exterior improvements we make have to be per the Secretary of the Interior's historic standards. There's a preservation group called the Historic Richmond Foundation, which has helped shepherd funds for us. They help us sort of, they send groups who are interested in the building, which has bared fruit as far as donations to the 501c3 nonprofit, and they're heavily involved in the city. The city's changed around us. I mean, Shockoe Bottom used to be a bunch of commercial warehouses and old tobacco warehouses and whatnot. Those are all apartments or professional buildings now. And the city's changed around us, and there's a lot of rezoning of things going on. The building just next door to us just got turned into, it was an old stable or tack warehouse that got turned into apartments. And we have a restaurant right next to us. And in 1900 that was a barn, and the barn burned down, and you could still see some of the singes on our attic from up there. So we've always sort of been here as the city's changing around us. As far as being in, I guess the city's grand plan, the city is more concerned with the broader sort of development of Shockoe Bottom, and we're sort of a nice piece of that to their eyes. As far as with other historic groups around, we've got something that we do in the city called Court End Christmas, although it's kind of changed now. But what it is there's a couple days, there's Time Traveler's Passport and Court End Christmas, where the Valentine Museum, which is in the Wickham House, which is a historic house, the Governor's Mansion, which is built in 1813, Federalist style building, the Edgar Allan Poe Museum, which is a house that was built in 1737. It's the oldest building in the city. And St. John's Church, which was built in 1741, there's a shuttle that goes around, and the shuttle takes people to the different historic buildings. And so we have, and the John Marshall House. John Marshall was a prominent chief judge. First, he shaped the Supreme Court in the United States as we know it. He was one of the guys who organized the lottery that funded Mason's Hall back in 1785, 1787. So a lot of groups that are interested in John Marshall and other aspects of a court end in the historic buildings in Richmond, we collaborate with them a lot on, the John Marshall Society will come there. The Valentine has a group that's from out of town, and they'll bring them to Mason's Hall. They'll do a tour of Mason's Hall for their guides. For the Valentine does like walking tours, and so they'll have their guide school, and they'll bring them to Mason's Hall. So we have a really strong relationship with other historic buildings in the area. And as far as other historically inclined groups, the Daughters of the American Revolution, as I mentioned, Commonwealth chapter adopted us as their project for the year in 2021, and dedicated put a nice bronze plaque and gave us some money to do some improvements to the building, including restoring and faux graining the front doors and building a retaining wall and a fence on the west side of the building. So part of what we're doing is you may or may not be familiar with the Marquis de Lafayette's Grand Tour of the United States in 1822 to 1824 to 1826. The Marquis de Lafayette was a general in the American Revolution from France who was, like George Washington's adopted son, and he was, considered a great hero in the United States. In fact, he was one of his first independent commands was in the defense of Richmond in 1781. So in 1824, President James Monroe, the Mason, brother President James Monroe, maybe there's some other honorific title he has, invited him back to do this grand tour of the United States and see old friends and visits the city. And he came visit different cities, and he came through, and he was, like a rock star. So in Richmond, his relation to Richmond is when he came to Richmond, he was in 1824, October 24th, came to a meeting at Mason's Hall with his son, George Washington Lafayette, and they were made honorary members of the lodge. And then they went over to the Union Hotel and had, I guess, a festive board, and they came back and closed the lodge. So I don't know. They had a lot of toast, so I don't really know how that ended up going. But so you've got organizations like the Sons of the Revolution, the Sons of the American Revolution, and the Daughters of the American Revolution, and other groups such as that, who Lafayette is huge with the American Revolution, his history buffs in the South. So we're the only connection that Lafayette has to the city of Richmond. So we have we're working on engaging those groups in a memorial of the visit of the Marquis de Lafayette. So that's another example of how the Masons Hall is tying into the broader historic community at large in the city and the region.
Now, looking behind you, is that Mason's Hall? I believe it is, based on the pictures I've seen.
Yep, this is Mason's Hall. This is one of the nice pictures from the Mason's Hall 1785 Facebook page with our brand new paint job, American flag, and that door in the background is currently getting, not that everyone can see where I'm pointing to, is getting restored.
Now, if other Masonic lodges or groups, any groups, and I'll leave some links in the description, some links that were sent to me, but how can Masonic lodges or groups go about supporting Mason's Hall and the work that you guys are doing?
Yeah, so we have our initial goal is sealing the envelope of the building. When you're preserving a building, it's important to not allow water infiltration. So that's why we have the window program, painting the building, shutters. We want to put we're going to put gutters on the building, restoring the front porch, and those are our current initiatives. And so we have a 501c3 nonprofit set up called Mason's Hall 1785 that you can link to in the show notes. Mason's Hall 1785.org. And that is, you actually make tax deductible donations, and that money is earmarked for capital preservation projects on the building. So, but that's probably the best way to support the preservation efforts. Coming to the building, I mean, we love this is probably aside from the fact that we have a really awesome lodge, the lodge itself. I mean, showing other Masons this building is far and away one of the great pleasures that I get in life. So one of the ways to support is to come to Richmond when you're driving through down 95 or whatever, especially if you're on the East Coast, come to Richmond and check out the building.
When you are showing people in the building, whether it be your own open house or public or private tours, what are some of the things that you like to emphasize or that you really like to show off as a tour guide?
The lodge itself I can screen share some photos, or should I just send those to you later?
I believe that you can screen share. I think you should be able to screen share, and it should pop up on the recording.
Yeah, so one of the neatest things that we have is our Royal Arch Room. I'm seeing if I can find photos. Our Royal Arch Room, somewhat close photos, has, it's like, if you're a member of the Royal Arch, you probably know that you have to go in your lodge, and you have to go to some Masonic lodge and set up all of your I'm not a member of the Royal Arch. You have to set up all of your veils and all that sort of stuff. So there we go. Oh, it's actually, the screen sharing is disabled. But that's fine. It's probably getting too complicated trying to shuffle up a bunch of images. But the Royal Arch Room is, the Royal Arch chapter that used to meet there was started in 1792, and we have these gigantic, I mean, they're probably like 12-foot ceilings, and they have columns all the way up with the veils going across. So if you're a member of the Royal Arch Masons, come in and they're just amazed that you don't have to trot out all the equipment before every meeting. We have I like showing off the candidate prep room at the Royal Arch. We've got the original wood floors there, exposed, and that looks, really, really neat. And we have portions of the building where you could see some of the beams. So
sorry to interrupt. You should be able to screen share now if you want to give it a shot. If not, go to the link in the description below. You'll be able to see it there. I promise.
Yeah. So here's okay, could you see that?
Yep.
So here's sort of some pictures of the Royal Arch Room. That's the lodge room itself. I should have probably prepped more of these. But here's some pictures of a couple of pictures of the Royal Arch Room. That is, I mean, it's just really breathtaking when you go in and you see it. We've got murals all over the walls. Now, but the other thing is, in our lodge room, one of the things I really like showing off is, so this is our master station, and this canopy is, this is a senior warden station. I just noticed the strength up. Now we have these canopies over the officer stations, and the one over which I'll send you a photo of this later. The one over the master station was from 1792. It was done by Cloteworthy Stevenson, who was doing woodworking on the Capitol and woodworking on the U.S. Capitol. So those are pretty proud. If you're a fan of architecture, that's definitely woodworking. That's one of the neater things. The lodge room itself just feels, it's like when people walk in there, so you could really feel that this is an older lodge room. And so Masons who visit especially are often sort of taken aback by that.
And as somebody who organizes and runs tours of the Windsor Masonic Temple, how long have you been acting as kind of a tour guide facilitator at Mason's Hall?
Since 2016, so 6 years now.
So as myself, somebody who runs and facilitates tours of the Windsor Masonic Temple, and I know a lot of people who watch this maybe do open houses or tours at their Masonic building, what advice would you have for somebody giving a tour? Like, what have you learned in the 6 years about how to give a tour of a Masonic building, or really even before you did your walking tours? What advice do you have for somebody trying to be a tour guide at their Masonic home?
3 things. Write a script, right? You have to have a script, because otherwise, if you get into the point where you're just regurgitating every single fact about everything, people are going to glaze over. When I did the historic walking tours, people have maybe a 2.5 hour attention span, and then they just start getting information overload. So my number one thing is write a script, but don't stick to that script. So I always write a script and I memorize it. I go through and I memorize it. If you're a Mason, you're probably pretty good at memorizing stuff, or at least have some experience doing that. So you memorize your script, and then eventually that's sort of your base. And then as you learn new things as you go on or new things happen, if you have a command of your script and the information, you could pretty easily insert them in. I find you always got to insert humor. And so the humor, most of the jokes that I have on tours or tours of Mason's Hall have just sort of been things that I've come up with off the cuff that people ended up laughing at that I just have incorporated into the tour. So pauses to emphasize, and this is just, I guess, basic public speaking, but pauses to emphasize certain things, pausing for laughter. If you make a joke is one of them. The other thing is you have to tee up a really, really good and simple explanation of what Freemasonry is. Because as you know, if you're a Mason, it is really hard to explain to a non-Mason what Masonry is. I mean, you could come up with, a sentence, we're symbolic application of the tools of operative Masons and, working tools of architecture to sort of philosophy of life or moral philosophy. So we're not a religion. We're not like a charitable organization, like a Lions Club, et cetera, because these are all the questions that people are going to have. And you really have to have teed up why do you have, like, for example, I showed you the Royal Arch Room with all those murals. People go in there, what do all those murals mean? You say, well, we pass along the Masonic knowledge through, the reenactment of certain things from the building of King Solomon's Temple by the operative Masons there. You just have to have something punchy, because otherwise people ask all sorts of questions, and then you can get really into the weeds. Oh, how old is Freemasonry? Where does Freemasonry come from? And what you're trying to do, especially when we do open houses, is, I'm trying to keep a tour to 45 minutes. So we can get people up through the lodge. We have the lodge is 3 stories, and so you got to take people up from the dining room level all the way up to the top of the building, and get them out of there before you run into the next guy bringing a group of people up the stairs. So you really have to write a script. You have to keep it concise. And a part of what we've done that's really helped is Jake Crocker, actually, during COVID, he runs a couple restaurants in the city, and they weren't, operating obviously during COVID, the lockdowns. He really manifested a museum room and what was formerly just like kind of a storage room, the Royal Arch Ante Room, and curated a lot of the stuff. So if you have certain artifacts highlighted, you can point to those and tell a concise story. But probably the biggest thing is and all that is, people, you really get into the weeds on what Masonry is. People have all sorts of questions, and I usually say, if you have more questions about Masonry, you can ask me after the tour down in the basement once I've given sort of kind of an explanation of what it is. So that's part of it. And then the script, to just, you got to keep it concise. You got to keep people moving, because people are going to glaze over. Try to make it interactive. And especially if you're, we're also an operating historic building that's fundraising. So you definitely want to have sort of a concise, organized, sell's probably the wrong word for it, but, or pitch is probably the wrong word, but just, hey, this is what we're trying to do. Here's how you can contribute, is another important thing to have. Now, when we do like a private tour or one-on-one, I'll give people as long as they want. But generally, you're getting like maybe an hour and a half out of the general public at the most before it just starts getting too much. Oh, the other thing that I would recommend is set up a waiting area. So when we have open houses, we have people come and meet. And when we first did them, we just gave tours to people as they come in. But that really leads to, you'll end up with one guy giving a tour to 2 people, one guy giving a tour to 20 people. So have, and this is something we're working on, so have an area of the lodge with something interesting for them to look at while they're waiting to to maybe a video, or you could play Dan Brown, The Lost Symbol, or something like that for people to do while they're waiting for the next tour to start. Because if you start bringing everyone as they come along, you're going to run into each other. You're going to be talking over each other. So just you got to organize the timing from room to room and the scripts and have a waiting area.
And I think I'm hoping that the people who watch this, who are Mason, but even if you're not necessarily a Mason, but you're involved in a historical building. Well, first, I hope this encourages people to check out Mason's Hall. If you're in the Richmond area, check it out, take a tour. If not, send them some money. The link's in the description below. Support them because it is a very important piece of Masonic architecture. But then I also hope it encourages people to take a look at their own, built legacy, whatever, where are you meeting as a Mason? What is the issue of your building? So many buildings have incredible history behind them that is either not celebrated or not preserved, or maybe people don't even necessarily know the history of the building. And the real shame is when the buildings end up being lost, either sold or demolished or whatever it is. So I think it's wonderful what you're doing. And I think it's I'm sure it's always something valuable for your lodge, but I think it's valuable for the whole of the craft in North America and really in the world. So I want to say thank you for the work that you and your lodge is doing to preserve kind of what is I suppose a national treasure, but definitely a Masonic treasure.
Yeah, well, we appreciate that, and that's one of the things that maybe didn't emphasize enough is that we don't just view this as a historic Masonic building, which it is. I mean, this is a building that's related to multiple historic figures and events throughout American history, and Richmond's history. So when it was built in 1785, 1787, this was the only non-denominational public meeting space in the city. Richmond, the original capital of Virginia, was Williamsburg. So in 1780, during the Revolutionary War, they moved the capital to Richmond, which was kind of just this backwater tobacco port town. And so when Mason's Hall was built in 1785, predating the Constitution, it became a public meeting center. Methodist and Presbyterian ministers were allowed to hold services there. The city courts met there sometimes and adjudicated trials there, including John Marshall. The person whose brainchild this building was a guy named Edmund Randolph, who was governor of Virginia and Grand Master of Masons in Virginia. At the same time, he was also the first Attorney General of the United States. And at the Constitutional Convention, he presented in 1787. He basically was the one who presented the Virginia Plan, which became the basis for how the Constitution, was essentially drafted. And so, with that, all those important ties to people who are important to American history, who may otherwise, be lost. John Marshall, Marbury versus Madison court case, which you probably remember from elementary school if you're an American, if you're in the United States, had a ton to do with this building, and as I mentioned before, including organizing the lottery that funded the building, and a lot of it helps tell the story of a lot of lesser known Richmonders who were members here. The Solomon Jacobs, who was the first Jewish Grand Master of Masons in Virginia, and former mayor of Richmond. William Fouché, who was the first administrator of the smallpox inoculation in Richmond in Virginia. Joseph Darmstadt, who was a merchant in the city, who actually the bill hadn't actually been paid for the construction of the building in 1792. He footed the bill for it, but he was a merchant in Shockoe Bottom. People like these can often be forgotten to history. A guy named Sam Moody, who was a member of our lodge, who was one of the people in the Daughters of the American Revolution. That was her ancestor. These are all people who are part of the fabric of Richmond and America, or the United States of America, that our building is helping preserve the story of. The During the American Civil War, the building was saved by a Union general who was a Mason. The Confederates, when they were retreating from the city, they set fire to all the tobacco and the gunpowder in the warehouses down by the riverfront. Richmond's on the James River, and that was sort of a main thoroughfare to get tobacco and other goods out to port to be shipped. And so when they retreated from Richmond, they set fire to all the tobacco and all that in the warehouses, and it caused a huge conflagration. There was rioting, there was looting of all sorts of buildings in the city. People didn't know if the Union soldiers were going to come in and start. The United States soldiers were going to, start summarily executing people, which they didn't. Actually, they came in and put out the fire that was happening and the conflagration, which Mason's Hall survived, which it was the Grand Lodge of Virginia building at the time. So some Masons went out and found the general who was taking the city, Godfrey Weitzel, who was a Mason, and he sent Emmanuel Stevens, who was a Mason, up in Massachusetts, and we've since made contact with his mother lodge, and they stationed sentries around the building to prevent it from being looted. And so you get all these interesting stories and interesting ties to major events in Richmond and in the United States history. And so part of that is the telling of that story, a lot of things that might be forgotten. The telling of Lafayette's visit to Richmond in 1824. A lot of that stuff could be forgotten to history, but with this building, we can tell the stories of those people.
We're back. We never left. I hit the stop recording button prematurely. I got excited. Brother Maggy offline told me about a very cool incentive piece of recognition that you can get for supporting Mason's Hall. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so if you donate $100 to Mason's Hall 1785, aside from getting a tax-deductible receipt, we'll send you the certificate making you, saying, you're a member of Mason's Hall 1785. Not our lodge specifically. It's not a membership in a Masonic lodge, but it's a commemorative certificate about, that you contributed to the preservation of Mason's Hall.
By the way, that's $100 US, I'm assuming. So
$100 US.
All my Canadian people, Canadian brothers watching, it's I can't do it. 130 about Canadian, give or take, something like that. Can groups take advantage of that? So, like, if maybe a group wanted to fundraise and send $100 in, or a lodge wanted to send $100 US in, would the plaque say, Harmony Lodge is a member of, type of thing?
Yeah, absolutely. We could do whatever group you want. With lodges, what would be great is a part of the window adoption program that we have is we get a commemorative plaque for a plaque that's the lodge's name, however you want to dedicate it or put it on the window. So, your lodge can actually be a part of Mason's Hall.